Shout out to Sauce the Boss, of course, man. Who's in the building, man? Sauce the Boss, yo. Sauce the Boss, of course. Send the sauce.
wig is custom made to perfection.
The woman you just saw in that video recently killed 2 young girls and their mother while they were walking down the street in New York City after crashing into them with her car. This is Miriam Yerimi. And since August of 2023, Miriam had racked up 20 speed camera tickets and 5 red light camera tickets in New York City. And actually, at the time of this crash, Miriam's driver's license had already been suspended, so she wasn't supposed to be driving. Now, Miriam herself, the driver of the vehicle, actually won $2 million in the past after she had filed a sexual abuse lawsuit against the NYPD. And in October of 2024, the NYPD actually showed up at her home to do a psych evaluation. And in January of this year, she threatened to sue them again for $5 million. It's unknown exactly what caused the crash at this point, but last Saturday, Miriam plowed into that Uber driver. And like I said, this was a huge crash, and she ended up plowing through a group of individuals, including a family on its way home from the synagogue. So the crash actually killed a 35-year-old mother named Natasha Sada and her 2 daughters, Diana and Deborah, who were 5 and 7 years old. Absolutely tragic. And sadly, Philip, Natasha's 4-year-old son, was gravely injured in the crash as well. In total, there were 9 people injured in this. And Miriam definitely should not have been on the road after all those violations and having had a suspended license at the time of the crash. This story is just absolutely unbelievable. And it always seems like it's other people on the road that you have to watch out for, especially when you've got people like Miriam behind the wheel.
She claims to have seen a bunch of dead bodies, dead children in a Maseka truck. Whoa, what the? How is everybody else so calm, but like she's the only one that's like freaking out about it?
Yo me quiero con mi Tranquila, ¿se quiere ir a su casa? Primero necesita tranquilizarse, porque si llega hacia su casa, los va a asustar. Cuida con su niño.
That's fucking crazy. That lady, she was a gas station worker. She came across this truck when she went around back trying to get to the area to fill up the tank. She saw a bunch of dead children, to be specific, in the back. After that video went viral, a lot of people were making up rumors online saying that she was found dead a couple days later. Nothing really happened to her. They never put out her name, and they never put out like any more investigation of the case. This was strictly investigated in Mexico.
Yeah.
Or if there was even an investigation. But what people are saying that
How did this influencer mysteriously vanish from a party in Dubai, go missing for 10 days, then turn up at the side of the road, battered and bruised with a broken spine? Maria Kovalchuk is a stunning 20-year-old OF model from Ukraine. And this horrific case hit the headlines on the 19th of March when she showed up at the side of the road absolutely horrifically battered. She'd been missing for a total of 10 days after initially attending a party in a hotel in Dubai on the 9th of March. Now, it's not 100% confirmed what kind of party this is, and a lot of this is hearsay and speculation. Many are wondering whether this was something called a porta potty party. Now, it sounds absolutely horrific to me, but it seems to be a gathering where men urinate and defecate onto a female and pay them a lot of money. Again, this is not 100% confirmed, but this is just kind of the word that is spreading on social media right now. Some girls in Dubai have claimed that they've known these parties to involve some kind of beating of some sort. Now, no matter what kind of party this was that Maria attended, I think we can all agree that absolutely nothing warrants being left at the side of the road completely battered, bruised, with broken limbs. She had a broken spine and multiple broken limbs, and officials in Dubai were very quick, kind of suspiciously quick, to come out and declare that this was all an accident. They said she must have wandered into a construction area and had a fall from height. Everyone obviously felt that this was extremely unlikely, and also nobody knew how these Dubai officials seemed to know this so quickly. Maria was rushed to hospital and required 4 life-saving surgeries. She was in a coma but has now come out of this but is unable to speak. She'd reportedly previously told her mum that she was staying with 2 men who, quote, introduced themselves as representatives of the modelling business, end quote. Immediately after her attending the party, she just completely went off the radar and was uncontactable. She was found at the side of the road with no documents, no ID, no nothing. Now, this is incredibly disturbing, and apparently a trafficking case has been opened, and I'm sure more information will come out as we hear more about this. I'm really hoping that the truth comes out about what on earth happened here.
I've never cried harder than when I read this book. It's about the life and untimely death of 12-year-old Andy Brewer. She was kidnapped from her home in Arkansas on May 15th, 1999 by someone she should have been able to trust, her uncle, Carl Roberts. Carl would go on to sexually assault and murder Andy, leaving her in the woods for 3 days until she was found. And while her mom, Rebecca, was pleading for answers and finding her little girl, he looked her in the eyes and lied about what he did to her. Rebecca wrote this book to try and heal from the loss of losing Andy, and she details everything from finding out Andy was missing to those excruciating 3 days before she was found, and then to planning her little girl's funeral. And that's something that nobody should have to say, let alone live through. This book broke me in ways that I cannot even put into words. With each page, I feel like I cried a little bit more, and my face would literally turn hot with sadness. But through all the heartbreak that's in this book, you also get to learn who Andy was. And my gosh, was she a beautiful, kind, and responsible little girl who loved life. I truly don't think a story has ever stayed with me as much as Andy's, and that just proves how strong her mom's words are. Rebecca is literally carrying on Andy's legacy in such a significant way just by telling her story. One thing that I love is that Rebecca includes pictures of Andy throughout this book, so you really get to see who she was. There were many times that I had to stop reading to kind of sit back and really realize the gravity of what happened to Andy. Rebecca included Carl's written confession of what he did to her, and I'm not going to lie, it's one of the most horrific things that I've ever read. Absolutely nobody should have to go through what Andy did, and the fact that she was just a little girl, it's so heartbreaking. This book embodies grief and what it means to lose someone who is your entire world, the person who made you a mom. It proves that grief is not linear, and it affects people differently, and it affects more people than you probably realize. And although this is incredibly sad, Rebecca shares how she's moved forward with her life and how Andy is always at the center of whatever decision she makes. And let me tell you, Rebecca has gone on to do such amazing advocacy work for other families who have gone through the same thing as her. She is the definition of turning your pain into purpose. Rebecca is truly so kind, and I've only ever gotten to talk to her over email, but she deserves everything good this world has to offer. One thing that Rebecca made very clear in this book is that Andy is more than just what happened to her, and the entire world should know who she is. So please, if you can, go read this book and support Andy's mom. It would mean the world to me and to her if everyone could learn about Andy. She was a beautiful little girl who should still be here today.
There was a young 7-year-old girl who lived in an apartment building. One day, she told her mom that she was going to play with some friends. Hours later, the mother went to go get her daughter, but she was nowhere to be found. She then asked all of her friends if they had seen her daughter, but they said they hadn't seen her all day. Suddenly, the mother's stomach dropped when she realized her daughter was missing. She then called the police, who conducted a search of the entire building, but sadly, the girl was never found. 3 months went by, and the residents of the building began to complain about the water, saying it had a strange odor. More and more people began to complain, saying it smelled bad and tasted horrible. So one day, the janitor went to the roof and checked the water tanks. When he opened the tank, he was hit with a disgusting smell. He then looked down and saw the decomposing body of a young child. The police came and identified the child as the girl who went missing 3 months ago. Her corpse was in there undisturbed for 3 months, and the entire apartment building was drinking and showering with water that had a rotting corpse in it. Nobody knows how she got in there, and when the mother found out about this, she was absolutely devastated.
There's these pictures of some burnt astronaut bodies.
Is that real?
That's real.
No way.
They were part of the Apollo 1 mission. They were going to do a launch test, right?
Okay.
And to make sure everything was working perfectly fine, they go inside, they buckle in, they have their compression suits on, the astronaut suits, they have their helmets, everything, right? Oxygen is flowing, and right away, one of the astronauts point out a weird smell, kind of like sour cream, like sour milk. They stop the test, they check the oxygen, they're like, everything is completely fine. They didn't even know what it was. They kind of forget about it. Then they had trouble with their communication system. So they stopped the test again, fix it back, they put it back on. Everything seems good. And out of nowhere, the facility, the people who are making sure everything is good, they see a surge, a power surge happen. And obviously it's like a short circuit. And usually when that happens, it like sparks. And even if it happens in a house, if electricity is not done correct, it could light the whole house on fire. That's when one of the astronauts, he says, fire. What the? And since oxygen was running, it ignited right away. And they didn't die because of the fire. They died because of all the smoke that the fire was producing, and they couldn't breathe. A thing too that to me was a little fucked up as well.
I am the firstborn son of Chester Bennington, and over the last 6 years, I've gone from a firm supporter of his suicide to someone who's absolutely convinced that he did not take his own life.
So Chester Bennington, the lead singer of the band Linkin Park, died on July 20th, 2017. And according to all official reports, he ended his own life. Ever since I first made a video about Chester Bennington's death, I've had thousands of people commenting that he didn't take his own life. And I've seen a lot of people talking about the fact that he was possibly working on a sex trafficking documentary. But I've never been able to find any concrete evidence to point that that was the case. However, on May 18th, 2017, about 2 months before Chester Bennington died, Chris Cornell was found dead in his hotel room. Chris Cornell being the lead singer of the band Soundgarden, who was a very close friend of Chester Bennington's. But here's where it gets a little interesting. Apparently, there were injuries on the back of Chris Cornell's head that were discovered by paramedics, but injuries that were not written down on the official autopsy report. And even Chris Cornell's own widow doesn't believe he took his own life. This quote was taken from a Billboard article published in 2018. They say Vicky Cornell has been adamant that she didn't believe her husband would take his life. She also says you can clearly see a gash or at least a visible big bald spot in pictures and video footage, referring to the state that they found Chris Cornell's body in. And with Chester's own son coming out and saying he believes his dad was murdered, I'm excited to see what information he's going to unveil. People have been speculating for years on the deaths of Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington, And there's a very, very large group of individuals who believe that they were murdered. And admittedly, there are some things about both stories that don't necessarily make sense at face value. But like I said, I'm really interested to hear if Chester Bennington's son has any new information to unveil, because it definitely, no matter what, would help us all, I think, understand what happened here just a little bit better.
A woman in America has been arrested for having a miscarriage, and we are actually living in The Handmaid's Tale. Just weeks ago in Georgia, a 24-year-old woman was found bleeding and unconscious. Rather than there being immediate concern about the woman's health and well-being, police decided to arrest her. The woman was Selena Chandler Scott, and she had suffered a miscarriage. A witness had reportedly seen her placing a fetus in a bag and then putting it in a bin, which, may I add, is very, very normal in the US and the UK. Although this obviously may be quite triggering and controversial, in the US and the UK, there's no actual legal guidance of how to dispose of a fetus after a miscarriage. In fact, quote, doctors often tell women to simply miscarry at home. No one is taught how to handle fetal remains, end quote. Women who go ahead with abortions in the UK or suffer a miscarriage at home honestly just usually flush the fetus down the toilet. I know that might be really horrific to hear if you do not know that. I worked in a hospital for a little while, and I actually remember being completely shocked by that information. Like, the trauma that these women must go through is horrific. So the police charged this woman with one count of concealing the death of another person and one count of throwing away or abandonment of a dead body. The fetus was examined while the woman was held in custody and was determined to not have been a full-term baby and not born alive. Therefore, no crime had been committed and the charges were dropped as they should be. But this is not the first case of its kind. In 2023, a woman from Ohio called Brittany Watts was charged with the abuse of a corpse after similarly just having a miscarriage. A grand jury thankfully ended up declining to move forward with the case. Many people are absolutely outraged with the way that particularly the US seems to just be completely disregarding women's rights. Many, including me, believe police and prosecutors should not be weighing in on how women respond to their own miscarriages.
In a shocking and tragic turn of events in Brazil, a 45-year-old man met an untimely death when a cow crashed through the roof of his home, crushing him as he lay peacefully in bed. The incident unfolded when the cow wandered onto the roof after climbing a steep hillside behind the house. The structure, never designed to bear the weight of a fully grown cow, gave away when the unexpected burden happened. In a horrifying instant, the ceiling collapsed and the 1,300-pound animal plummeted directly onto the man, pinning him beneath its massive frame. The man's wife, who had been lying beside him, narrowly escaped injury. Shaken but unharmed, she witnessed the nightmarish scene unfold. Her husband trapped and gasping for breath as the cow thrashed in confusion. Neighbors rushed to help and emergency services were called, but it was way too late. The man succumbed to his injuries shortly after the incident. Could you imagine just peacefully sleeping in your bed one night and then a cow randomly falls through your roof, killing you? I cover a lot of crazy things, but this is definitely one of the craziest I've ever covered.
Were found shot to death in the bed of their truck during an overnight camping trip, and a disposable camera found at the scene contained these disturbing last known photos of them. This is the mysterious case of Brandon Rumbaugh and Lisa Guerrieri, and it's one that will never not terrify me. On October 17th, 2003, Brandon and Lisa would head out for an overnight camping trip in the small town of Bumblebee, Arizona. The couple had recently got engaged, and they wanted to camp out underneath the stars to celebrate their one-year anniversary. They lived together in Scottsdale, and originally they were going to go to Disneyland to celebrate, but it was too pricey. So last minute, they decided to recreate their first date and go camping instead. Lisa borrowed her mom's white 2000 F-150 truck and a video camera and told her that they would be back the next day. Now, Lisa's mom almost didn't let them borrow the truck because it was in need of an oil change. But again, last minute, she changed her mind and said it was okay. But she had no idea what was about to happen on this camping trip or that it was about to become one of Arizona's most chilling unsolved mysteries. So their road trip started. The two had bought a disposable camera before leaving Scottsdale to document their trip. And about halfway there, Lisa's mom called them to see if they had made it to their destination yet. Lisa said no and that they still had a long way to go, but at this point, everything seemed fine. Lisa's mom said, "Be careful," in which Lisa replied, "I love you." And those were the last words that she would ever tell her mom. What happened after this phone call has never really been explained. So when the next day came and went and nobody heard from Brandon or Lisa, Lisa's mom immediately knew that something was wrong. They never returned the truck and weren't answering phone calls, so so she called everyone she knew and the police to begin looking for them. Brandon's friends knew of the general area where they were supposed to be because they had all gone camping up there before, so they began looking, but initially couldn't find anything. Then they traveled down Bumblebee Road, just off of I-17, and that's when they spotted their truck. Upon getting closer, they found Brandon and Lisa in the bed of their truck, deceased. They were in their sleeping bags and had been shot multiple times in the head. When the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office arrived to the scene, they found 2 items were missing, which were Lisa's keys and the video camera that she had borrowed from her mom. But about 100 feet away from the crime scene, police found the couple's broken disposable camera. It looked like someone had thrown it, and on the camera were the very last photos ever taken of Brandon and Lisa. They were posing in the same bed of the truck that they were killed in. Now, according to Lisa's mom, this final photo of Lisa seems off. She said that this wasn't Lisa's true smile, and it was almost like she was scared and uncomfortable, but still trying to smile anyway. But there was one final photo taken on the camera, and it is really disturbing to me. The final photo taken on the camera is pretty overexposed, and you can really only make out the corner of the image. At first, authorities didn't know what the image was of, but they discovered that it was an image of the inside of an old restaurant in Bumblebee. But what doesn't make sense to me is that this was taken after the final photos of the couple, meaning whoever took this picture was likely their killer, and it was taken after they were killed. This is really scary to me because it seems like if this is accurate, the killer took their camera from the crime scene, took the photo inside the restaurant for whatever reason, and then returned the camera to the crime scene. Why would anyone do all of that? It doesn't make sense to me, and it's one of the most disturbing things about this case. Police believe that Brandon and Lisa were either asleep or getting ready to go to sleep when they were attacked. And there was evidence that Lisa during the murder. There was one item that can DNA, possibly a killer, but what that was has not been publicly identified. Police ruled out a murder-suicide, and there was no evidence of a robbery gone wrong or any sexual assault. And there were no drugs or alcohol involved in the killings either, so it's left many wondering what truly happened to them and why. This seems incredibly random, and it's terrifying. Where they went camping just off of Bumblebee Road is pretty popular now, but it wasn't back then. Their campsite was extremely desolate and in a pretty remote part of the desert near the Bradshaw Mountains. You would think they would be safe out there completely alone, but someone was lurking out there waiting for them. And it makes me wonder if this was a wrong place, wrong time type of situation. Maybe they saw something that they weren't supposed to see out there. It's really similar to the movie Wolf Creek, which is loosely based on the true story of Ivan Milat, who killed 7 people randomly as they backpacked through the remote wilderness. As much as they investigated, police never found who killed Brandon and Lisa. But one thing did come up early in the investigation that stood out to me. Just the night before they left on their trip, Brandon may have had an argument with an unknown man in the doorway of their apartment. It was around 10 p.m., and although the man has never been identified, he was reportedly in his 40s, tall and husky, and he was wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans. It's not known what they were arguing about or if they even knew each other. And just a month after the murders, police announced that they were looking for information about or from this person, but they never said if he was considered a suspect or not. Brandon and Lisa had no enemies. Since this was seemingly so random, many people have questioned if serial killer Israel Keyes could have been responsible. Israel Keyes murdered 11 people, but is suspected to have killed many more. He started in 1998 and never really had an MO. He targeted random people who just so happened to cross his path, and he would often strike in parks and campgrounds. He was active during the time that Brandon and Lisa were murdered, and one of the scariest things about Israel is that he would plant kill kits around the US that contained murder weapons, so he was truly random about who he killed. He didn't have a specific profile, but this is just a theory and has never been officially connected. Although their case is still open, it remains unsolved 21 years later, and whoever killed Brandon and Lisa is still out there.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This man murdered his girlfriend and then died of a heart attack while he was burying her. In May 2022, locals rang police after they noticed a man unresponsive in his garden. Police in South Carolina raced to the scene and they found the body of 60-year-old Joseph McKinnon. He was found lying next to a big hole in the ground that he'd been digging. It also became apparent that his girlfriend Patricia was missing. Now, police tried and failed to get hold of her and then eventually found blood in the pair's home. When they questioned her work colleagues, it turned out that she hadn't turned up to work that day, and that was extremely unusual. When police did some further digging into the case, they discovered that actually the hole that Joseph was digging was a grave for Patricia. Joseph had attacked her and then wrapped her body up in bin bags. After killing her, he'd had a heart attack while trying to conceal her body.
Nothing could have prepared me for the end of this story. So when I was little, I used to always complain about a scratching noise coming from the room next to me. My dad actually converted the guest bedroom next to my room into a home office, and I was never allowed in there. He was a really busy man. One night, I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I thought I heard a small sob come from his office. I could faintly make out the sound of a woman crying, but I knew I wasn't allowed to go in there. And honestly, at that point, I was kind of too afraid to anyways. The next day, I told my dad what I had heard, and he told me it was probably just a bad dream. But that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had heard. My dad spent the entire day in his office that day. I didn't see him come out once. The next night, I waited until my father was asleep, and I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I went into his office. And when I opened the door, there were no books. There was no desk. There wasn't even a single chair. Just scratched into the walls a million times. Help me.
These are 3 California creatures you never heard about. Up first is the Dark Watchers, and they're usually sighted in the mountains of California, and are described as tall, featureless, dark silhouettes, often wearing brimmed hats and having walking sticks. If you ever see a Dark Watcher, whatever you do, never approach it, because if you do, you will completely vanish forever. Next is Tahoe Tessie, who is a water creature and is living in Lake Tahoe. It's been described as having smooth skin, and is apparently so big it's the size of a bus. So next time you go to Lake Tahoe, you better look around for Tahoe Tessie. Finally is the Lone Pine Devil. This is also a creature who is often sighted in the mountains of California, and it's described as a large creature with both bird and reptile qualities. They have razor-sharp claws and venomous fangs. So what creature do you think the creepiest is? In my opinion, it has to be the Dark Watchers just because of how creepy and weird they sound. But either way, let me know which one is the scariest to you. Whatever you do, do not look into her eyes.
My father locked me in our basement for 11 days and claimed not to know I was there. My name is Charles Bothwell V. I was 12 years old in 2014 when my father, Charles Bothwell IV, still had custody of me and mistreated me. In June 2014, my father reported me missing. The police conducted an intensive search, but eventually I was found hidden in the basement of the family home, approximately 11 days after being reported missing. I lived in inhumane conditions. My parents deprived me of food, subjected me to repeated abuse and violence, and cut me off from all social contact. My father even pleaded for public assistance on television during my supposed disappearance, while he himself was the perpetrator. The case took a shocking turn when investigators discovered that my father was aware of my presence in the basement. Both my father and mother were arrested and charged with severe parental neglect. Investigators also found evidence of abuse against me. I was subsequently placed under the custody of Child Protective Services. My father was then sentenced to 18 months probation and ordered to take anger classes, and he will no longer be allowed to approach or contact me.
Threw my baby from the 4th floor. My name is Sonia Hermosillo, and I was 42 years old in 2011 when I committed the worst act. I had 3 children, including 2 little girls, and my baby No Medina, a 7-month-old boy with autism. My husband and my daughter had already noticed that since the birth of my son No, I had a different behavior. His illness and various health problems, such as the flat head that required him to wear a helmet all the time, had particularly affected me, and I often neglected the way I took care of him. That's why my husband decided not to leave me alone with our baby, but I took advantage of the fact that he was in the shower to take him and leave with him. That day, he was supposed to undergo tests at the hospital, so I drove there. And once I arrived, I parked on the 4th floor of the parking lot. Once out of the car, I thought that throwing him from the top of the 4 floors might be a good idea to see if he could survive. So I took him, removed the helmet he was supposed to wear, and threw him, and he died instantly. I was quickly arrested by the police. Once arrested, I said that all of this was due to mental problems. I confessed to the police that I killed him because of the problems he had. I was then sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole.
This is the time I was almost abducted by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I went to go visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a pretty hard thing for me to process, as he only died in March of 2011, so it was all still pretty new to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave, crying and thinking to myself, when all of a sudden I looked up and see a man running at me full speed from the woods in front of me. I was able to get myself to my truck pretty quickly before he got to me, but by the time I got in the truck, he was only about 50 feet away. I got in my car before he could get to me and locked the doors, much to his displeasure. He threw his hands up as if he had lost a football game. I started my truck and started driving out as fast as I could, but not before I passed him. I didn't break eye contact with him the entire time I was driving past, so I got a really good look at him. So cut to a few years later, I'm pretty bored at work, so I download this random app that has a bunch of paranormal, UFO, cryptid, and serial killer stories on it. And as I'm browsing through stories, I come across one that makes my heart absolutely drop. There was a photo of a man I recognized very well, Israel Keys, who was most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and throwing the pieces of her body in a lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. He had been killing for a few years, to the point where no one really knew what his actual death toll was, and he would eventually go on to take his own life in prison. At the end of this book I wrote about him, they mentioned his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if he left any kill kits in that cemetery. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster.
This abandoned prison is straight out of a nightmare. Welcome to the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility in Warwick, New York. Originally opened as a reform school for boys, this sprawling complex was eventually turned into a prison for men. And over the years, it housed a number of deplorable criminals from New York State, including an infamous serial killer. As you walk the halls of this crumbling complex, you can feel the energy. You can feel the souls reaching out to try to talk to you. One of the more infamous spirits that haunts this property is that of a teenager named Jimmy. Obviously, back when this was a reform school for boys, abuse was rampant in these halls. And one teenager named Jimmy decided to take his own life by hanging himself in one of the buildings out back. Now, I can tell you from firsthand experience that this place is definitely haunted. I spent the night there ghost hunting while filming an episode of my show with the New York Post, which is available on YouTube now. And you could just feel the energy of these buildings emanating. I mean, there were a number of crazy historical things that happened here in these buildings, including a riot, and obviously tons of people lost their lives here over the years. I mean, the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility was known as one of the most violent prisons in the state of New York. And every single part of this complex is haunted, including this eerie church that was left abandoned after the building was closed. When this building sat empty for years, rituals were performed by people that broke in here, and the dark energy from these rituals still remains. If you want to see the full video that I filmed here, just head to the New York Post's YouTube channel, and for more spooky content, follow me on YouTube at The Paranormal Files.
This baby was kidnapped, and then the parents received the wrong baby back. In April 1964, Dora Franzak gave birth to baby Paul. Although this should have been one of the happiest days of her life, it soon escalated into a nightmare. Paul was kidnapped. A woman posed as a nurse, and using her fake profession, she managed to steal Paul from the Chicago hospital. Word spread that the baby was missing, and 600 homes were frantically searched. Paul's parents made devastating pleas for his return. Now, police only had Paul's ear shape and blood type to go off. However, they did soon find an abandoned child in New Jersey. When Dora saw him, she was incredibly relieved. She had baby Paul back, and that would be the last of it for 10 years. One Christmas, when he was hunting for presents, 10-year-old Paul discovered a memory box, and inside this box were news clippings from his kidnapping. When he confronted his mum about this, she shut the conversation down, but it stayed in the back of his mind. Paul started to have doubts about his true history. In 2012, he did a DNA test, and the results shocked everyone. Paul was not the Paul who'd been kidnapped. He wasn't biologically related to either of his parents. Now, sadly, his parents were actually furious at Paul and they refused to speak to him for a year. In 2015, Paul discovered that he was actually born as Jack and he had a twin sister, Jill. His biological mum had a drinking problem and his dad was a violent man. Meanwhile, the FBI ended up reopening the case of missing baby Paul. It was actually another home DNA test that revealed where he was. A man named Kevin Beatty was actually missing baby Paul. Now, the woman who raised him had actually passed away, so some mystery still remains about missing baby Paul. Tragically, in 2019, Dora actually arranged to meet her long-lost son, Kevin. However, before the pair could reunite, Kevin actually died of cancer. Paul's twin sister Jill is still missing. He continues to look for her, and you could actually help solve this cold case. By taking home DNA tests and uploading your information onto gedmatch.com, we can all help to solve cold cases.
This is the backpacking beheadings, the tragic case of Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin. Before Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin embarked on their journey to Morocco, Louise posted on Facebook letting her friends know she would be making a trip to Morocco and was asking anyone out there if they knew about Mount Tubkul, and the theory is this post put the attackers on high alert and apparently how the girls would become targets of the attackers. Nobody knows how true this is, but it's the leading theory. But the girls continued on their journey, and eventually as night fell, they set up camp to rest. During their hike, it's believed the attackers were stalking their victims, waiting for them to stop, waiting for them to get further away from civilization, and once this happened, the attacks ensued. The attack was brutal, and both Louise and Maureen were brutally beheaded, and some reports even claim the girls were sexually assaulted. The murder of Louise Jesperson was recorded and posted online. It's believed Marie Newlin was murdered first, but there's no video of that, though people online claim it's out there. The video starts with Louise Jesperson lying on her stomach, and she's wearing a t-shirt and underwear. And almost immediately, the terrorist attempts to behead her. But he starts from the back of the neck, and that usually isn't the way to do it. Right when he cuts, Louise says ow and begins to scream, and apparently in her native language she was begging for her mother. Once the man beheading her realizes it's hard to behead someone from behind, he then turns her over, and one of the people he was with stomps on her face to hold her down, and he then starts beheading her from the neck. And at this point, there's a lot of blood and a lot of screaming and gurgling. He then begins hacking at her neck to complete the beheading, and once he's beheaded Louise Jesperson, he picks up her head and takes it to her tent and places it inside, and the video concludes. It's a quick video, but it's extremely bloody, extremely horrible, and extremely sad. It's definitely one of the worst beheadings I ever covered, mainly because these girls were very young, very naive, and didn't deserve what happened to them at all. One of the girls even posted how the world is safe and that we shouldn't judge people, and it's super sad that they paid the price of this with their life. Please don't go looking for this video because it will stick with you forever, and it's really not worth it. Rest in peace to Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin.
This is one of the most dangerous men in Canadian history, Shane Pattinson. And while he doesn't really look it on the outside, he really is a dangerous and twisted man. So in 2012, Shane was sentenced to 5 years in prison because he had collected over 4,500 CP images depicting the extreme essay of young girls under the age of 5. 4,500 images. So he served most of his prison sentence, and he was released in 2015 and was immediately sent to a halfway house with the Salvation Army. But just shortly after getting out of prison, when he went to the halfway house, investigators performed a routine check-in on him, and what they found was extremely shocking. When investigators checked in on Shane, they walked into the room, they found him naked from the waist down. He had 3 devices open, each of them displaying CP images, and he was actively toying with himself at the time that they walked in to these images. When these investigators performed searches on what Shane had in his room, they discovered that in the short time he was out from prison, he had already accrued thousands of additional CP images and was actively sharing them with other users across the internet. This means that he served his first sentence for CP possession. He got out and almost immediately went back to collecting it and obsessing over it. And like I said before, this guy had thousands of victims across the planet, and he was working his way into the dark web to connect with other pedophiles across the world. Now, Shane has a pretty disturbing life story. When he was only 3 years old, he allegedly played mommy and daddy with a 4-year-old cousin of his. a game which turned graphic, if you know what I mean. He then stated that his great-grandfather sexually abused him for years until he hit puberty. And he said that he first started viewing CP images when he was only 14 years old. He also stated that when he was just 14 years old, he essayed an 8-year-old friend of his sister's. He also told interviewers that he was intensely aroused by smelling women's undergarments and by sniffing dirty, soiled diapers. So he was eventually sentenced to 7 years in prison, but with his time served, he was actually only given 5.5 years. And this happened back in 2018, which means if it all worked out in his favor, this year, Shane Patterson will be released from prison. And after reading this dude's story and learning about what he does, I do not think that he's going to be able to live in a normal society. I don't know how or...
Sauce the boss, of course. Assembly sauce. Back on. Who else, man? Sauce the boss, man. Of course, Sauce. Back on. Sauce the boss, yo. Sauce the man. Shout out to Sauce the
Sauce the boss in the building. Sauce the boss in the building.
Sauce the boss, yo. Sauce the boss, of course. Shout out to Sauce the boss, of course, man. Who's in the building, man? Shout out to Sauce the boss.